right. Hi, folks. Mark Doust here from Quiet Light Brokerage. I'm the founder of Quiet Light Brokerage. We've been around since 2007, helping entrepreneurs prepare and exit their businesses in the online space. That would include e-commerce, Amazon, but also SaaS and content. And I'm super excited to be joined by Jon Hainstock today. Jon and I have a very good mutual friend. His name is Mike Pandel. I went to college. He was a roommate of mine. I'm actually the godfather to his oldest daughter. And so when Mike introduced me to Jon, I was like, this is awesome. Any friend of Mike is a friend of mine. And to boot, Jon is a pretty successful entrepreneur in his own right, a successful founder of a SaaS startup, which he initially raised funds for, but then bootstrapped the growth of that business over the period of 8 years and eventually did what so many SaaS owners hope to do, and that is exit those businesses. And Jon, you did it at a high level. You sold to a private equity firm, which is, in a lot of people's minds, they understand what's involved in selling to a private equity as far as the size. We won't discuss specific size of the deal, but it just means that you were successful enough to attract the attention of some serious institutional money, which is really, really exciting. So Jon, thank you for coming on. Welcome to the show. And looking forward to having this conversation and just getting a sense from you what that process was like.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about the company. And look, everybody in our audience knows that different founders are able to share different levels of information about their business. So we know it's SaaS. Is there any more that we can go into as far as the type of SaaS, what industry you were looking at, or even just kind of who you were targeting with that SaaS company?
Yeah, so ZoomShift is the name of the company, and it is scheduling software for hourly employees. It's really designed for places like coffee shops and retail, hospitality, stuff like that. So we had the scheduling component, and we also had payroll and time tracking in the app as well. And it came with a web app and then a mobile app. And so our customers were typically kind of in that range of $40 to $50 a month. They'd be ending up paying us per user per month. And so we saw most of our growth actually through organic channels, through SEO and word of mouth. And that was the way that it kind of grew steadily over time.
That's fantastic. How did you get into that space? I mean, you're a younger guy. It seems like a lot of industries that older professionals, and I'll put myself in that group, grow into is just experience and exposure to understand where the niches are. How did you get into that specific niche so early on?
Yeah, that's a great question. We started with my business partner actually started it in Marquette, so in college. And he applied for the Marquette Business School competition, business competition with this app. And from there was able to release the product through an incubator company called 94 Labs, which is now known as Generator. It's located in Milwaukee. And so it started off as just a portfolio project, just to showcase what my business partner, Ben, was able to build. And he really wanted to get into development and startups and all that kind of stuff. So it started there, and it started to grow, some through direct sales locally, but then just naturally through SEO. And so that's really where I joined the picture, was as it started to grow naturally. My business partner and I were working together on our own agency, which is how we ended up meeting Mike Pandel, great guy. And so we ended up focusing our energy back on ZoomShift when it started to gain traction organically. So it wasn't something we were putting a ton of focus in. I think we were just pretty early. If I'm, looking back and thinking about how the industry is like taking a little bit of a turn, just in terms of like growth, it's really kind of picked up over the last few years. But early on, there weren't as many competitors, and so I think we were just early enough to have some traction with organic channels. So that's how I saw us getting into the industry. It wasn't something super clever or super unique. I think it was just good timing.
Why isn't that the truth for so many businesses, right? It's good timing that you get in, and the industry kind of grows with you. Plus the organic channels. I mean, today, organic is still a good channel, but it helps a lot if you have that head start.
Exactly. Yeah. Domain authority and just being around and trust, and search signals is still big. So yeah, I think that was a big part of it for sure.
So what role did you have in the company as it matured?
Yeah, so it was just Ben and myself for many years. And we were kind of teeter-tottering between the agency and ZoomShift. We didn't actually have formal roles. So it was kind of an interesting partnership in that we both, code, we both design, we both, kind of had our hands in a lot of different things and customer support and design. So it was almost like having built-in redundancy in a way. So we both worked a lot on product. We both worked on the marketing, shared a lot of things. So I would say my focus was primarily on the customer side, though, customer experience, and then working with Ben to do the product development and really figuring out, how do we match what our customers are asking for and building it out. And then he was just like the coding wizard just to make it all happen. And I would get in there too with him, but he definitely, if he had a label, would probably be more of the CTO in that way.
Yeah, small companies' labels are really whatever you need your label to be for the day, right?
Yeah.
You got to be
Yep.
flexible when you're small. I'm really fascinated by within the SaaS world of this idea of being able to find product market fit, right? Because it's so difficult to actually do and do well, and it feels like a lot of people go at it, attack it from an iterative standpoint where the iterations are really a glorified grab a dartboard and start throwing at that dartboard. I would love to know a little bit about any processors or any discoveries that maybe you came across to be able to hone in on that product market fit. And maybe it was just that. Maybe it was just maybe we should try this and see how people react. But what sort of tools for those that are looking at a SaaS company, either to buy and they want to improve it, or maybe they own a SaaS company and it's starting to get hold, but it doesn't quite have that great product market fit yet. Are there any processes that you found particularly helpful with narrowing that down?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, I'll say that I don't think we actually ever really hit what people would consider product market fit, where it just clicks and you just start seeing all this insane growth. I don't think we actually ever hit that. I thought what we did well was position ourselves as like a simple, clean, alternative to some of the other bloated products out there. And so when it came down to actually tracking our progress with something like that, it was, putting the tracking in place with Segment, to pipe our data over to other tools like Amplitude or Mixpanel or wherever we were tracking our kind of usage. And then we were just looking at core metrics along the way, like what's the health of the data, like what's the health of the accounts. Are they coming back? And to us, like the big key metric was like engagement. Are they coming back after a few days? So we really simplified it. Initially, we kind of started off doing like all of this kind of lead scoring. We explored some other tools in that space called, customer success tools. I'm trying to think of some of the ones that we tried. Can't think of them off the top of my head. I'll have to come back to that. But yeah, tried some of those tools and got fancy with it, and then ended up simplifying a little bit more and saying, let's just focus on engagement. Are people coming back, and retention? Are people, coming back after 2 days? If so, that's like a good sign, and so I think you can get as complicated as you want with it. You can track every single event. You can track, to infinity, or you could just look at like a handful of key metrics, and that's kind of where we ended up in that whole process.
I've experienced that with another business that I own. It's not SaaS, but it's subscription based. And it was the same thing where we were looking at attribution models for our advertising and trying to figure out these, how do we attribute the cost of acquisition to the proper channels? And then, what is the true cost of acquisition? We were getting so fine, literally to a fault, because we were starting to get some weird noise in our data, right? Facebook was not paying off for us. So we shut off Facebook, and then we saw our overall numbers drop more than we anticipated. And it was this really weird sort of like, something's not right in our tracking. And the solution was just that. We ended up saying, let's actually take a big step back and let's just look at the whole pie instead of the individual slices and just say, what are we spending and what are we getting out of that spend? And then let's back in from there into maybe some different ways of being a little bit more fine with it. But that idea of not trying to build the perfect engine right away or get so fine, because it's, what I love about the tools, and a lot of the tools that you mentioned, is that they do a great job of providing us user insights. What I don't like about them is that they're all still imperfect. And that's not a criticism of them. It's more of a criticism of how I think a lot of us use them or think what they promise they can give us. So I love that idea of simplifying. Did you ever run into the situation with this where user feedback didn't match necessarily what people were actually wanting? I know I've seen this with other companies where users say, hey, can you introduce X feature or Y feature, or I don't like this about it, and so you change. Or did you use that user feedback much in your product development?
Yeah, we always tried to, consider what the customer wanted, and we always were taking down their feedback. We ended up in a tool called Canny just to keep track of everything. But a lot of our product decisions weren't based on feedback. It was mostly based on it was saying like, are we able to justify putting this in? So a lot of it came down to, is it worth the cycles on the development side to invest in these things? And so if it was a small bet that could have a potentially bigger impact, we'd take a look at them. So an example of this would be, a big bet would be, hey, we're going to integrate with all these, payroll providers. That's a bigger bet that you would have to take. A smaller bet would be, hey, we're going to, create a better, more robust report for them to be able to track some of this data in Excel and stuff like that. And so a lot of the times we were really concerned about getting into really long development cycles or getting in over our heads to a place where we were managing things that we didn't want to manage, like code wise. We didn't want to have a bunch of debt in that way. So a lot of the decisions were really based on that. Like, is this going to be smart from a technical standpoint? Because we don't want to get in over our heads if it's not going to make sense for the dollars coming out, on the other side. And so it's impossible to predict. So for us, it was just a matter of like, if this sounds too big and we can't really wrap our brain around it, like how it will work out technically, then let's just pass. And we actually had to do that a few times on some of the features that people asked about. So yeah, that's always a balancing act. There's no right answer. It's just constantly trying to make those trade-offs as you go.
Yeah, and I often find that interpreting what users say they want to what they actually want isn't necessarily the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the getting ready for a sale and that process as well. What I'd love to do for the duration of this episode here is to talk about the calculus between you and Ben as to, hey, maybe we should consider this. And did you formally explore those sort of exit options? Did you prepare for that, and what that was like? So 8 years of running the business, when was it that you guys first realized that you had something that might be sellable, and B, considered actually working on an exit?
I think pretty early on, we realized we had something sellable. We didn't think it would be a meaningful number for a while. And so we talked a little bit about endgame, like what our hope was and stuff like that. We always kind of positioned it as, the goal is that this is a means to an end, so that we're able to get our like ensure some sort of a nugget that we can, like have for the future. That was kind of the idea behind it, but we never really had serious conversations until we got approached by a couple companies along the way, and brokers, and just people asking like what our plans were. Often we're contacted by VC seeing if we were interested in raising, and that wasn't super appealing. Although we talked about that too, just like what are the implications? What would that look like? Maybe that's an option for us. But we didn't really take it seriously until we had some brokers contact us and talk to us a little bit more about their partners and who they were working with and stuff like that. So I would say not until the last couple of years of doing it really were we even considering it, because we wanted to see how far we could get it ourselves. So yeah.
Yeah. So as far as preparing the business for sale, did you find that when you started those initial conversations, did you Did you have a lot of work that needed to be done before it made sense to actually get going? I mean, oftentimes what happens for clients, and not every time, but oftentimes, there's homework to be done. You have something valuable right now, but it would be great if you did X, Y, and Z before you exited. Did you find that the company had that, or did you guys make great decisions along the way, so there wasn't a lot of homework there?
So it all happened pretty fast. So
Mhm.
honestly, it's not like we were building up to an exit as much as once we got into conversations, there was, maybe a couple weeks time of letter of intent to due diligence and all this kind of crazy stuff. So it was a pretty fast process in terms of once there was interest in a sale, in buying ZoomShift, going from that point to actually, exiting was a pretty quick process. So we didn't really have a lot of time to prepare. It was more, this is where the company is today, and we're going to try to backfill the data if we need to, for due diligence and everything we need to do. But it wasn't super messy and it wasn't super crazy because it was a small organization, and at the time it was just the two of us and then one customer support representative. So it was tiny, so it wasn't a lot of moving parts. And, we'd done the best we could, keeping clean books and, keeping stuff tracked in profit, or not profit, well, in Bear metrics. And so I felt like overall, we had a pretty good sense of where the business was at when we were contacted, which worked in our favor. But it wasn't like we were preparing for it. It wasn't like it was built to sell. It was more like, hey, it's built for a 2-person, team to manage. And, therefore it's also kind of easy to sell because there's not a lot to it. There's not a lot of things going on.
Were you approached, and for those listening, you might be wondering why I don't know anything about the deal. It's because we didn't do the deal. Did you sell through a broker, or were you approached directly by the firm that bought you?
No, we sold directly, so we weren't
Yeah.
we didn't go through a broker, and that actually weighed in a little bit to the decision, just because it was just something that we felt was a little bit serendipitous, and how it worked out just with the synergy between us and the people that bought us, or bought the company. Gosh, didn't buy us. So yeah, so it was. I think it just worked out really well, and timing wise, it was like a really weird point because we were kind of deciding, do we want to try to hire and really, go after this a little bit more, maybe potentially raise money, or what are we doing? The conversation I think happened a lot, at least for us, was what are we doing? What is our goal? Do we want to exit this thing? Do we want to just run it indefinitely? Software does have like an end date, like at some point. What are we trying to get out of this thing? So, yeah, when we were approached, it was pretty good timing because we were at a reset point where we're like, okay, maybe we could do this and it would make sense for us to do it. So, yeah, it was just good timing on their part in contacting us.
These stories are always fascinating for me to hear because they are literally the 1 in 100, right? So
Yeah.
the company that actually completed the acquisition, I guarantee they spoke to a minimum of 100 companies before they found that right match. And those that are listening that are buyers and have set up your own proprietary search, how difficult this is for that serendipity to hit and to find a company that had your numbers together and was easily transferable. I mean, that's a pretty rare thing, but it's a beautiful thing when it does work out. How long was, you said it was fairly quick from the moment that they contacted you to LOI to closing. Do you mind if I ask what that total time frame was about?
Yeah, from beginning to end, it was maybe, let's see here, maybe like 3 months or so,
That's
roughly.
amazing. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
so it was really a tight timeline, and honestly, it would have been much quicker if we were able to get through the legal portion of it faster. We had run into some hiccups simply because of the structure of the deal, since it was a stock sale, not an asset sale. And so with a stock sale, the buyer kind of can run into some potential liabilities, and because of that, they got to really be careful with their legal. And because of that, our lawyers didn't love like the verbiage in the contracts. So there was a ton of redlining, a ton of back and forth, and that really just added tons of time and money to the sale, unfortunately. So really, it was supposed to be more like a 1 month thing, like it was supposed to be really quick. It got drawn out really to a really long process, in our opinion, just because of the way that it was feeling. Like there was so much back and forth. But I look back at it and yeah, it was short. It was a very short period of time. Most people closing deals, could take a year and a half, or, longer. And then they have to stay on for a long time. And for us, we didn't have to do that. We literally handed them the keys and we kind of walked away. And, we were in the Slack channel and available via email and call. But we were pretty much out of there by February. So like a month and a half, maybe 2 months later, we were basically out totally. And I know that's not very common for founders, and super thankful that part of the process was painless.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of what you went through is not very common, but it's kind of like it's the goal and the vision that a lot of us have for the exits. The 3-month time window isn't too terribly surprising. And if you ask me, where is a deal going to get held up? Lawyers are going to be one of my top suspects. As much as we love lawyers, right? We love lawyers. We have to remind ourselves that they're out for our best interests. Why a stock sale? I'm curious about that.
Well, stock sale is great for the seller because they, in our situation, we were a C corp, and with a C corp, there's certain tax laws that allow you to not have to pay for capital gains on profits of the sale of stock over a certain period of time. So you need to have it held for 5 years. The actual thing is called QSBS, and I'm going to butcher everything that's involved. But basically, you have to have a C corp organization structure. You need to have ownership of original issue stock for 5 years. And so there's a couple other qualifications in there, I think, too. Basically what that means is you don't pay, federal taxes on a big chunk of that, right? So you don't pay federal taxes on a stock sale versus an asset sale. You're going to get crushed. It'll be, upwards of 30-40%. So that also weighed into the decision. It was if we could negotiate a stock sale, that'll save us a ton, and just in terms of putting more money in our pockets. And so we looked at it from that perspective of this is a pretty unique spot to be in. Most people, from what I hear, and I'm not sure, you can tell me if this is true or not, most people don't see stock sales unless the deals are pretty large, like 10 million, 20 million, something like that. And ours wasn't for that. So it was it seemed like a really good opportunity for us to do the stock sale. And it was kind of a no, we had to have that. That was a thing we had to have for sure.
Yeah. No, stock sales are fairly rare, primarily because you're a C corp. Most businesses are not C corps. That would be one major difference of that. Now, there are benefits, like you said, from a tax standpoint, but we have an episode on tax mitigation strategies for the sale of a business, and even under an asset sale, which is typically, depending on how you allocate it, 20 to 25% cap gains on most businesses. There are ways to mitigate that as well. And my guess is, with some of the delay that you guys ran into, it was the liability issue on the part of the buyers, right? You buy a business, all those liabilities transfer 100%. There's no barrier, as opposed to an asset sale where there's a change in ownership of the company. And so some level of differentiation from the liability, as well as the balance sheet liabilities, don't transfer over. It's a fresh balance sheet.
Exactly. And I think that's where some of the, the pushback and some of the tug and pull was just we were trying to do a deal that was not super common. And it wasn't a structure that, our lawyers were super comfortable with because of the verbiage around it, of the liability of the transfer. So yeah, I do think that really weighed into why it took so long. I think if it was an asset sale, it would have been done much quicker, for sure.
Yeah. Though, I mean, you bring up another point that I often like to make to people, and that is that lawyers are, when you're selling your business, you have an ecosystem of advisors, and they're there to help coach you in a certain regard. If we think about it like a baseball team, you have a pitching coach, you have a hitting coach, and they're there for their own domain of what they do. And lawyers fit into that ecosystem very, very well. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I love that your lawyers didn't necessarily love it. but it's a direction that you went because you are the person making the ultimate decision about your business. And people need to have that attitude going in. And if you had hired a broker to help out with that, they would fit into that ecosystem as well. They are a voice guiding you, and it's much of where we get our name from at Quiet Light, right? We are an advisor to the eventual sale. So 3 months start to finish, with most of that time being spent on the legal stuff, isn't bad. What was the due diligence process like? I know so many people who sell their business, that's where things were difficult and hairy, but it sounds like your business was fairly simple and straightforward. So that may have been easier for you. What was that process like for you?
Yeah, the process was pretty straightforward. We had to open up our books. We had to open up our code base. We had to do all of those things that you would do in due diligence. And I think the things that we uncovered there, or the things that were a little bit challenging, were the same things. Like it was, why did you do it this way with the books, or why did you do this way with the taxes, or this or that? And so it was really just making sure that the stock sale wasn't going to get in the way, on the accounting side. The coding review, the any of the marketing stuff, that was all like skimmed over. It seemed like they didn't really care very much. It was straightforward, I should say. I shouldn't say they didn't care. It was just straightforward to them. They had worked with the technology before, which is Ruby on Rails, and so they were comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that part of it seemed to go pretty well. I mean, I think for a few weeks, it was just us every day getting up and just answering questions, getting documents, chasing down various, vendor emails, or talking to our accountant or lawyer, or this or that. So there was a ton of that, but I mean, that's to be expected. So I don't think it was super painful. I don't think it was unusual. I think it was overall pretty good, actually.
How did you guys handle the code review? This is an often times a sticking point with a SaaS business, depending on how deep somebody wants to look at the code. What was the arrangement that you guys had? Did you just hand over all the code, or did you just open it up portions? Did you do selections? Did you do walkthroughs? There's 1,000 ways to go about that. I'd love to know what you guys did.
Yeah, we shared the repo with the developers, and we walked them through the code base and kind of some of the thinking behind it. Some of that was done real time. Some of that was also just done, just documented. And we used Loom videos to do asynchronous video explanations of things. So yeah, we tried to provide as much context as we could, and just be as open and as transparent as we could. I mean, we realized that there's like risk there in sharing all of that information, but we wanted to put our best foot forward and just, show that we wanted to make the relationship easy and good. So, and I should say too that, with the partners that bought, we ended up keeping a stake in the company. So both my business partner, my co-founder, and I have 5% stake in ZoomShift moving forward. So the deal was really predicated around like, how do we become good long-term partners with them, and be as open and transparent as possible. Don't hide stuff, because it's really only going to burn us in the future if we do that. So that really made us just free to share everything, the good, the bad, and the methodology, the thinking behind stuff, the why. So yeah, I felt like that was actually very easy. Like it wasn't something that we were resistant of, or anything like that. And they had a process. They've done it before, so we just followed along with their process.
Yeah, I love that aspect of it. I think what sometimes gets lost during these processes is, and I've talked about this a lot, right? I think some people, when they get into a sales mode, they get into thinking like they need to act like Gordon Gekko from Wall Street, right? Where now we're in the game and we're going to play this hardball, and it's so destructive at the end of the day for these transactions. I think it's a testament to you and your partner as to the attitude that you went into, trying to be open, trying to be willing to share, and understanding that there's risk. You mitigate the risk where you can, but there's also a cost to every action that you take. And if you lock down, it lengthens things. It makes it more stressful as well. So finding that happy medium between mitigation of that risk exposure, and then also understanding, look, that buyer, they need to trust you. If they don't trust you, it's done, right?
Right. We had to earn the trust. We had to, build the relationship. So we wanted a good partnership for the long term, So that's what we were going for. It wasn't about, coming in with this massive agenda. We wanted to make sure we got our fair deal, but it wasn't about, twisting their arm to get it.
Right, right. What sort of level of inspection did you do on them? Obviously, you have stake in the company, so you had to make sure that they were a good company.
Yeah, that's something I actually wish I had done more of. I wish I would have talked to a handful of the founders that had been, had gone through that process with them. So we didn't do a ton of due diligence on them. Was familiar with one of the buyers personally, just from following them in the on the internet and knowing of him. So knew he had some credibility there, and based on the companies that I saw them buy, I felt like there was some solid credibility. So I didn't have a ton of homework into it. I like I said, I do wish that we would have taken the time to get to know at least one or two founders that they had worked with, just to see what the process was like, and done that work. But we didn't end up doing it.
Yeah, no, understandable. It's not commonly done, but it's a good bit of advice for people going through this, especially with private equity, where there's an equity role occurring, which for the most part, 5% equity is less than we typically hear. So oftentimes there's upwards of 25% equity role, and you got to check to see the company you're dealing with, if that's a good partner. How have things gone after the fact, right? You've closed the business. You've been away from it for a while now. You said that largely you were able to walk away from the business. You didn't have a long employment agreement or anything like that, which again is a little unusual, but pretty awesome all the same. What's it been like afterwards? And I'm curious, both from, have you looked back on it and said, boy, I wish I could have done X, Y, and Z differently, but also from a standpoint of what next? Because I think when we own and start up, and you guys are bootstrapped. And so bootstrapping a company, it's a unique thing. Like, you live and breathe that company when you're bootstrapping it. You're responsible for it. And it kind of gives a purpose and a mission of what I'm doing right now in my life. And afterwards, for some people, there can be kind of an emptiness, or not like emptiness in terms of lack of purpose, but what next? I'd love to know how that process has gone for you, and what are you looking at today now that you're past this exit?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's really difficult, because in our situation, we were caught off guard. We weren't prepared for an offer or an exit or anything like that. Our intention was to continue growing ZoomShift for an eventual exit, but we hadn't planned that far ahead. So, ideally, you have something else to go to. You already have something cooking that you're working towards, and then you can kind of make that transition over to it. We didn't have that, so it was literally like, hand over the keys, you're done. Like your passwords are taken away, you're out, right? And that, like, in one sense is great, in another sense it's kind of like abrupt. And so I think for me, I was ready for something different. And so for me personally, even though it was abrupt, like, it felt like a real big weight off my shoulders, just to not have to think about the future of the company. So much of a founder's life is forward thinking, just like constantly being in future thinking. And so it was nice just to take a break from that, take a little bit of relief from that stress. I would say a few months in, I started looking back at the moves that they started making, and I was kind of thinking I would see something that would just be so revealing to me. Like, I'd learned so much, and it really wasn't. It was more of the same. So I thought they were going to come in and change everything. And they didn't change very much. So that was really interesting to me to see, is to realize that, I guess that was comforting in a way, because in one hand, I wanted to think, oh, they have this magic bullet that they're just like waiting to use. But it actually felt nice to look back and to realize and watch them operate and say, no, they just did what we were doing, but better and with more of a team. And like, okay, like, that makes sense. Like, it's more of the same. And we could have continued doing that. We chose not to, but it kind of felt nice though, that it wasn't like, oh gosh, why didn't we just see this one thing that we could have done and all of a sudden taken off, And so during this whole period of time, it was like COVID hit, pretty hard in March. And that affected a lot of small business, of course. So that affected ZoomShift. And so we saw that. And honestly, I look back and I'm like, I feel so blessed. I feel so thankful that we were able to get out before the wave of COVID and just all the emotions and all the things that we would have had to deal with on that side. So I feel super fortunate timing wise there. And then in terms of like what I'm doing now, it's really about trying to get back in the game. Like I wasn't sure if I wanted to do software again. I started looking at all these things with everything from owning self-storage and real estate and stuff like that to e-commerce and or physical goods. And I just kind of came back to software. I really enjoy software. I like building products. And to me, it's a great business. For me, when I look back at my experience, it was never a bad business. It was something that, it was a great business. So want to be able to do that again, try to do it a little bit differently if we can, and use the learnings that we acquired through that go of it. But yeah, so that's where I'm at today. I'm exploring a couple new ideas. I also have, I picked up like a really tiny SaaS or 50% of one, and just an odd deal as well. And that was kind of my entry back into the game, and just thinking a little bit about SaaS again, just getting into that mindset after a few months. And so I have that going, and then I have these other ideas that I'm starting to brew on and work on with a couple other teams. So that's where I'm at today. I feel like pretty excited about the new ideas that I'm working on and the teams around them, and just excited to see what's next with that in 2021.
That's awesome. That's awesome. First of all, thank you. Thank you for sharing the story that you've had. It's a remarkable story. It's like I said, it's the 1 in 100, and frankly, it's probably not even those good of chances when we see them happen. So it's cool to talk to you about this though, and to hear how that happened on your end. I'm super happy for the company that acquired ZoomShift, because I know how hard they have worked to be able to find a good company and a good target. I'm really happy for you and your partner as far as building something that was able to sell. I love one of the takeaways that I'm super glad they didn't do anything radically different, because then you would have been thinking, why didn't we think of that? That's always a worry, right? I talked to one private equity guy years ago who told me the secret of private equity is we have money. Right?
Yeah.
And they can pour some money into something, and sometimes that's the best. He actually said it's an accelerant, like a fire, right? We're just trying to accelerate everything with that money. And sometimes infrastructure and SaaS. Do you have any just overarching advice to somebody who is in that founder role, that future looking, always looking at the future sort of role, thinking maybe I might one day exit this company. I don't know if I want to. So they're in the thick of it, maybe not in a place where they're actually actively looking to sell right now. Does anything come top of mind for that? And I know these are tough questions to answer, because it's so open-ended. You can go a million different directions with it, and it could be something as simple as wear your sunscreen if you're going out on the beach.
Yeah, I think my thinking around this is more philosophical than practical, in the sense of really figuring out what you want out of the business, and if you're satisfied in how it's going and what your days are like. Are you enjoying your days? Like, are you enjoying the game? Are you enjoying the market you're in? I think so often founders, myself included, can feel like a little trapped in something because they've invested so much time, so much energy into this thing, and you feel such an obligation to keep it moving forward. So just to always be, aware of where you're at on that line in terms of like doing what you actually feel you should be doing. And when you start to feel a little bit like there could be something else, or something else is more interesting, something that's, can stand the test of time. It's not just something that it's not just shiny object syndrome, right? But you feel called maybe out of that. I think that's the time to really start thinking about it. If you can, from a practical side, get a good accountant, get some good lawyers, work through the details and make sure that you have all of those things in order, so that the transition of the business is easy and simple. I know that with the new companies that I'm starting, we're a writing first company and a remote first company with both of those. And so that just means everything is documented. Everything is, put into a place where the context around it is given. Like our meetings are documented, our thinking is documented. And I think that really helps if you're going to hand off the company to somebody else, is to be a writing first culture and to, put in some practical stuff there and make sure you're tracking and all those things are good. But ultimately, it's a decision that just like any decision has trade-offs. It's not really right or wrong. And you'll want it to feel right or wrong. You'll want to be like, I want to create my pros list and my cons list and have it just make sense. But at the end of the day, it's a gut, it's a gut choice. It's something that you have to really do some, searching on, some soul searching, and give yourself the space and the time to just, absorb it, think about it. If you're working with a business partner, you have to be in alignment. I'm of the thought that, you'd never place business over your relationships, especially with a founder, somebody else who you're going into business with. And so to me, it's always, are we aligned? And if not, okay, we gotta get creative about something. If I want to exit and you don't, then we have to make sure that we treat each other really well through this process and figure it out so that neither one of us is just getting the raw end of the deal. So I think for me, it's always about, getting self-awareness figured out, getting in alignment with your team or your founder in this case, and your co-founder in this case. And then from a practical standpoint, there's books. I mean, you can read stuff like Built to Sell and all those kinds of things that help you or articles and stuff. But I don't think those are really what helps make a decision. It's a gut check thing. It's figuring out what you really want to be doing and if you want to stay in the game or not. And I think that really is where I felt like I got clarity on it all.
I know you said that it wasn't very practical, more philosophical. And I typically like to have my guest end on the last word with that. But I think what you said there, it encapsulates very, very well for anyone that is in the position of buying or selling. If you're in the position of buying, there's always the natural question of why is somebody selling? And you encapsulated very well there where we see most people, right? It's that gut, that understanding that it's just time to sell. And on the sell side, I remember I was at a conference years ago when somebody told me or asked me, they said, when should I sell my business? And I told them, I said, well, hopefully never. Right. I mean, hopefully it's great and you love it your entire life and you don't, it's making money and you don't ever come to the point of selling, because that's a wonderful thing to be able to do. And he was a bit surprised by that. But I think, again, it comes down to the idea of knowing when to exit. It's not just a financial decision. It's not just a strategic decision. These things do take place. They do have a place in your decision making process. But there's another element there, that soul search that you talk about. Yeah, it's somewhat philosophical, but I think it's practical as well. And if you're in the position of owning a business and you're thinking about selling, that has to come into play. So I think it's terrific advice. And it carries weight because you just went through the process yourself. And it came kind of out of the blue for you guys, where this happened quickly, which again, I think is awesome. But I love it. I think it's really good advice. Jon, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for having me. It's great.